Warzone can be pretty tough, especially on a brand new map like Caldera, where there's a learning curve that will take some time to get used to. Today, I want to break down some tips on how to best improve your game here, especially in this new world of Caldera. So that said, as we go along, let me know your thoughts down below. Is there anything particular you'd like to add to this list? Anything that we maybe forgot? Would you guys like to see more tips and follow-ups like this in sort of an upcoming series? Whatever the case, drop your thoughts down below. But if you enjoyed the video, do me a favor, drop a like on the video. And of course, if you are new to the channel, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single thing regarding all things Warzone, all things Vanguard. We got you covered here on the channel. So if you're part of that nearly 70% of viewers that are not subscribed and you'd like to help us on that road to 500,000 subscribers, I'd love to have you in the community. And if you think you have any friends that maybe need some help with these tips, don't hesitate to share this with them. That said, let's jump right into it. So let's start out with early game here. Let's go sort of in sequential order. When you're jumping into a game early on, you have to firstly decide to land hot or not. Depending on where the drop path takes you, if you're playing hot, you want to play aggressive. My hot landing zones of choice would be Arsenal, Mines, Power Plant, Capital, and Peak. Peak is usually that one that is hotly contested, at least right off the rip here the last week or so since Caldera has been introduced, where it's always going to be hot. Plus, if you end up getting a couple of kills here out of that, you can basically rotate to anywhere in the entire map. If you jump and glide, you can go quite far from Peak. But if you also want to avoid some of those higher traffic gunfights, Ruins, Runway, Subpens, those have all been lesser contested from my experience here. But bear in mind though, when you end up dropping somewhere, if it is somewhere that's a little bit more off distance, one tip that can really help you is that parachuting sideways actually maximizes your distance traveled. It'll be a bit slower in terms of travel speed, but if you go sideways towards your destination and then free camera, you're maximizing that distance that you can go. So bear that in mind. Wherever you decide to go, it can be a little bit further, and by default then it's probably going to be a little bit less contested. Now when you get actually on the ground loot selection here for Caldera and Warzone Pacific within season 1 is kind of few and far in between. You have a few weapons that are really good, and then you have some weapons that I would not touch with a 10-foot pole. Your ground loot STG, the green common version of it, the NZ41, that either green or there's a purple epic version if you want to call it that. The Owen gun is solid, the bar with BMG rounds, can't go wrong with that. Those are all ones that I would definitely say to pick up. Although things that I'd say to avoid, things like that MG with ridiculously high recoil to the point where you think that had to be added in as a meme, right? I'd avoid most snipers. The short barrel Tommy gun is good for like the first 20 meters for an engagement. Anything beyond that, it's kind of a pea shooter. And again, then the rest really comes down to a lot not really being lucky. So pick and choose, hope you get some of those better weapons. And again, because it is something that has a little bit longer of time between your loadout when you can get that firstly and what you pick up, make sure you're picking up the right ones. The early game meta, if we want to call it that, talking about the next portion of the discussion here, I'd say land, loot, and stack up on cash, and then jump into buying things like UAVs, self-revives, whatever the case may be that you find important at that moment. The amount of utility is honestly kind of unlimited now that we don't have the ability to buy loadouts right away, and plus it seems like cash is way more abundant right now in Caldera than it was within Verdansk before we ended up making that shift over. So UAVs are absolutely awesome early game here. You can end up seeing where players are because there's no chance of them being ghosted, and it can help you play a little bit more aggressive if you'd like to. Gearing up towards mid-game, our next portion of discussion, let's talk firstly about loadouts, because that's where I think that we kind of signal that mid-game entry where you have your weapons of choice. Now it comes down to what you do with that. Starting with loadouts, there's a couple of things here that I want to talk about tip-wise that can really help you out, I think. Firstly, be conscious of when these actually come in. We know that these are on set time values as they were within Verdansk, but unlike our last year and 9 months or so here in Verdansk, which those came in at the 15-second left mark of the first zone closing and the 45-second mark of the 5th circle's reveal, with Caldera it's a little bit different and it takes a little bit longer. The first free loadout drop here, which marks the ability then to buy them even going forward, comes in at the 50-second mark of the second zone's reveal, so 10 seconds after the first zone has closed, and the second loadout drop will come in around the 20-second mark remaining of the zone 6 reveal, about 10 seconds after zone 5 has completed closing in. So again, kind of a shift by almost an entire zone here, and probably by total about 45 seconds comparative to what you may be used to. There is a possibility that another loadout event can happen within zone 4 or 5, but those are very limited and don't happen often. They're basically like your resurgence in-game event or jailbreak events where it happens every once in a blue moon. But also talking about loadouts a little further, it seems like with Caldera's update, all the loadout drops are now only coming in at the edge of the next closed circle or inside it a little further. In all of my games, it didn't matter if I was 20 meters away or 500 meters away. Every one of my loadout drops was always on the edge of or inside the next zone, assumingly to avoid the chance of it being out of zone if you have to land back for it or something after a gulag and you don't have the opportunity then to get it. It sort of extends that ability for a few minutes of the zone closing and then also the next few seconds following the zone's reveal before that starts to close in. So you're going to either have a large travel distance or not so much depending on where you are, if you're outside of the zone or inside. I've also had a friend say that they've experienced a random 1 or 2 where that's not really the case, but regardless, it may make considering those rotations into the zone a little bit quicker. Not only will you be able to get your loadout sooner if you end up making those rotations a little earlier, but you'll also be able to hold enemies on their way into the zone that haven't quite made it. Now, as for loadout basics, what you should be running, we've talked about this here on the channel. We put up our top 10 loadouts video. If you guys want to see that in its entirety, check that out. Highly recommend it. Got some great weapons I think you can do well with, but sort of in general discussion, you of course want to be building your weapons out for recoil control, bullet velocity, and if at all possible, damage adjusting attachments. But outside of just the weapon builds, one thing that I'd highly recommend this year right now is EOD as your primary perk in that tier 1 slot, at least for the time being. I've run double time for almost the last year now, so it's incredibly weird to consider not flying around the map, but with the buff to almost all the lethals, it makes it definitely worthwhile. You're not going to get one hit by all these grenades that could be incoming. And that said, run frag grenades as well. Those got a buff to the point where they can do lethal damage in just one explosion here if the player does not have EOD in a certain range. It's pretty powerful now. Also, make sure you take advantage of the usefulness of fully loaded. Perk 2 for your Vanguard weaponry is predominantly unchallenged in my opinion. I don't think there's a whole lot that's worth it for the majority of weapons in that weapon perk 2 slot. So I definitely consider running fully loaded nearly full time if you want to, so that when you drop in either later in game for the second loadout drop, or if you just want to fill your ammo up and top off with the very first one, you have full ammo in whatever you're running. Also, utilize your loadout drop twice if possible. Now, that might seem weird to consider, but here's the thing. This is likely a tip for a later game, but if somebody on your team, say, grabs Ghost first loadout, if that second one comes in, you end up purchasing another, whatever the case may be, you can grab your loadout from that, and if you die, come back. If that player that didn't interact with that, or any particular member of your team hasn't interacted with that loadout drop that you already did, you can actually go back and grab it again. A sort of 2-for-1 deal where you can use that loadout once every life. So by dying, going to the gulag, or being bought back, you end up coming back in a different life. Now, another thing to utilize in mid-game is Zone 3. Zone 3 right now, assuming it doesn't change here in the near future, is something that's a fire sale the entire time. That means that you can get free self-revives, discounted utility like UAVs, which 3 UAVs now actually properly stack to create a genuine advanced UAV, showing ghosted players and everything, even inside the 150-meter radius of that UAV. Buybacks on squad mates are free, so go hard during this zone if you're an aggressive player, because so long as somebody has your back, you're good to keep coming back. I don't know if I have a clip on hand here of this. If I do, I'll put it up in the video, but I ended up breaking off and taking an engagement away from the rest of my team when one of these fire sales started, and the other 3 were fighting some absolute demons, and it was basically also a pileup of 3 to 4 other teams all in one. So they had a lot of gunfights on their hand in a very small area of play. They died. I was right by a buy station, got them with the immediate buybacks. Like, I'm talking, I was in the buy station watching their names be eligible for buybacks and immediately bought them back. They got back into the action, got a few more kills, but basically did that where I bought the entire rest of my team back twice, sometimes 3 times over. But it would not have been possible without that fire sale, which lasts like 3 minutes. So Zone 4 also has a chance for a cash drop as well as resurgence, and in some very rare cases, if I'm not mistaken, also another loadout drop. So bear that in mind as well, but just know that it might not happen. As for late game here, getting down to the final couple of zones, how you play for this win, firstly, play for numbers. If you have your whole squad up and you see that there are a lot of teams left, say 5 teams up and there's 7 other players, you know that you have a clear-cut advantage. But if you, say, have 1 person up and you see that there are 2 teams with 8 other players outside of you, well, you're gonna have the cards stacked against you. So it depends on how you take those engagements. If you have the numbers, you can play a little bit more aggressive. You can play for those kills. But again, if it's, say, a 1v4v4, maybe let those other 2 teams fight it out a little bit, dwindle their numbers down a little bit, and then jump on them when at all possible. Now, if you're going in and you have squad mates, if you're breaching a building, breaching clear together. It's very hard to take out 2-3 players as opposed to running in all one at a time. That's something that will make it very easy for them to pick you off and end your game prematurely. Also, make sure in the final zones, watch for stragglers. There's always going to be bush campers, especially when it's late in game, and especially with Caldera. There is so much foliage that makes it incredibly easy to do, so it's understandable nerves can get to players if you're not one that wins games much or makes it too far into the matches. If you're in the top 5 for the first time in a while, obviously you want to play that safely, but if you're not that type of player, be aware that it will happen. So just keep an eye out and make sure you try and keep a relative understanding of where players could be and make sure you clear those out with ease. Now, outside of late game, just some overall tips here to help you get better at Warzone Pacific. Party up and play with clear comms. Even just having another pair of eyes is useful. So duos, but trios and quads I always find are the best for spotting and calling out enemies. Make sure that you're doing that if at all possible. One thing also to consider in terms of helping your squad out in something that you may not really even consider regularly is that if you kill somebody with an armor satchel, if you don't have an armor satchel, your teammates don't have an armor satchel, don't run over the ammo to automatically pick it up and then grab the satchel. Instead, grab the satchel or grab the plates, but leave one of the other. Picking up a satchel will automatically fill you up to 8 plates, which is a fun bug that started back when satchels were introduced and then was kept as sort of an actual true gameplay feature. But this allows you to pick up those 8 that were either dropped or in the armor satchel and then allow your teammates to pick up those extras as well. Essentially, that enemy you killed with the satchel drops 16 plates as opposed to 8, and if managed properly, you can help out your entire team. Now, also, utilize geo and jump spots. There is a lot of geo, a lot of verticality within Caldera, and a lot of it can really help you out. If you'd like to see it, I'm putting together a big guide here of spots that are really helpful for jump spots and other outplay maneuvers like that, but watch this engagement. I get left in a 1v3 or 1v4, I'm not entirely sure, but I get to a point where I hear almost every one of them. Their footsteps are incredibly loud, but they don't quite know the spots of this building just yet, and utilizing geo and height to my advantage, I can make a couple of jumps here, and I end up wiping the entire squad from an area they never would really check. I unfortunately wasn't able to save my teammates in time, but it's an incredibly sneaky spot, and there's plenty around the map like that you can use to your advantage. Now, personally, there also are a couple of locations that I would avoid when we're talking sort of geo and things like that. Truthfully, I would almost entirely avoid the area below peak, both north, east, and south. West, not so much looking over mines, but at the same time, still not my favorite, because especially the eastern and southern hillsides, there is zero cover there, and it's all vertical, which we'll discuss here in just a second is definitely something to consider. So if you have a helicopter, you can breeze through that kind of stuff. You have a vehicle, you can breeze through that. But if you're going on foot, I would highly recommend avoiding that area if at all possible. Next, play for your rotations. Make sure that you're on the move, make sure you're methodically doing so, and maybe clear an area, a point of interest, rotate up to the next one, or rotate for the zone. A lot of players will ride the gas, and if you can end up cutting them off by rotating in front of them, you'll have easy pickoffs because you're basically guarding the zone that they have to go to. They have to move to you, and oftentimes they're not going to be sprinting and shooting at the same time. So you can catch them out in the open, and it helps out greatly. Coming back to that mention of high ground, there is again a ton of verticality in this map, but not like skyscraper wise, more so like natural geo wise. There's lots of hills, lots of cliffs, lots of valleys and low-lying areas that if you have the higher ground like Obi-Wan, that lets you have the ability to make the majority of those gunfights your own. You control and dictate how that fight will go. If you take some damage, you can back off and heal a little bit because they have to push up to you with oftentimes not a lot of cover. So have that high ground and make sure that you utilize it. There is a ton to it, and honestly, I think that a lot of my gunfights that I have lost have come down to that, not having the high ground. Next, farm contracts, utilize bounties. Personally, I always have a bounty active when possible because it's not quite a UAV, but it's a relative understanding of where a player or players could be in regards to rotations and map flow, and it helps greatly. It helps with that map awareness and is something that I highly recommend. And finally, if you can strategically take out enemies, do it. If you're in a position to take out an enemy doing something like a recon, hold fire until they complete that, and you'll come out with a little bit more cash on their dead body as opposed to if you didn't and you killed them before they completed it. Same thing goes for things like entering into loadouts. If you kill an enemy entering into loadout and you let them grab it, you'll have free loot. You'll have free good weapons probably as opposed to just the ground loot. So that's a couple of tips here within Warzone Pacific and Caldera that I think can greatly expand your ability to play and play well. So that said, that's going to wrap it up. I would love to get your thoughts thoughts and feedback down there in the comment section down below. What do you guys think of this here? Do you like these tips? Do you find them at all insightful? Whatever the case, drop your thoughts. If you'd like to see more, let me know in the comments. I'd love to make this maybe a series here, some pro tips, whatever the case, drop it down below. But if you enjoyed the video, do me a favor, drop a like on the video. And of course, if you are new to the channel, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single thing regarding all things Warzone, anything COD related. We got you covered on the channel. So if you're interested, hit that subscribe button. That said, thanks so much for watching. Honestly, Espresso. I'll see you guys later. Take care and peace.